Hi, this is Marcy Seither. Welcome to the Southern Christian Writer, where we are sitting down with friends and talking about faith, family, and of course, the love of writing. Thanks so much for joining me and Holly Varney today as we talk about her 25 plus year journey to being published. Thanks so much for joining us.
Tell me about starting Moonberry Lake and then doing this book. I tell people it's not different from any other writers that I've spoken to where you have this pull in you that you've always loved story from the time you were a child. I excelled in English class. I immersed myself and tried to become the best writer and the best student, growing up. And I would have teachers that said, you're really good in this. But I didn't have the confidence. Then when I was in college, I absolutely did not have the confidence to be an English major because who was I? I couldn't do that. And it was too intimidating. So I became a cultural anthropology major, which I absolutely loved because I'm fascinated by people and I've always just observed. And as a kid, I would just stare and find the people that were different. And I remember my cultural anthropology teacher pulling me aside and saying, I want to have a meeting with you in my office. And I was like, absolutely. Okay. And I went there and he's like, tell me why you're not an English major. And I said, oh, no, no, no. I could never be an English major. This is what I want to do. He's like, I don't think so. I think you're supposed to be a writer. And I was like, no, no, I am just going to go into cultural anthropology. My major was studying the death and dying rituals throughout cultures. And he said, I think you're supposed to write, and I'm going to set up an independent study specifically with you where you have to write something. And then every week we meet and you have to show it to me. And at the time, I thought, this guy is crazy. But he's like, there's something about you. I think you're supposed to be writing. And I ignored that. I wrote for him and we talked about it and I enjoyed it. But afterwards, I really took studying death and dying very seriously. I got my master's in palliative care and helping people. I wanted to be a psychologist in hospice. And I just immersed myself in the hospice world. And I really felt like so comfortable and at home. And I always tell people it's the one space when I go into a space when someone is in the process of dying or even actively dying, it's the one time where I feel like I can completely breathe because there's a space of such truth. And it's an honor to be there. And then I found out I was really good at it. And then I got married and had 3 boys in 4 years, and I was a full-time mom. And then we moved, and there just wasn't time for it. And then I discovered very early on at 17 months, my youngest son had some special needs that was going to pretty much take up my entire life of bringing him to different therapies. And so that's what I did. But it was a very lonely, lonely existence being a mom to a kid with special needs and then these other toddlers and literally like 5 days a week therapy. I kept telling my husband, like, my youth is being spent in waiting rooms. That's what I felt like. I'm like, oh, this is all I did. But during that time, characters would come to me and I would write down these characters and just have conversations with them. And then I said to my husband, I'm going to write a story of these characters. He's like, you do what you need to do. Okay. Like whatever you need to do. And I would find that during nap time or something, these characters would talk to me. And there's so much that went into that because I grew up in a very Lutheran church where God is this enormous entity that is there, but it's very intimidating. But I could always kind of attune myself to the creativity of the Holy Spirit and believe like, oh, this is how he talks to me, right? I can't ask anything really big of God, but he's got my back. He is going to give these characters to me to like distract me from what I'm going through right now. And that's what happened for a number of years. And I just started writing story after story. But then I realized I've got a lot of work to learn. And so I started reading the craft books. And then the more I figured out how much went into writing, the more you realize you don't know a lot. And it's not what you learn in high school. Don't ever believe anyone that's like, I was an English major in college and I can write a book. Absolutely not. They do not teach that. And so I immersed myself in craft books and I attended my first conference and was absolutely overwhelmed by the presence of everybody else. I thought everybody knows what they're doing besides me. And this is when imposter syndrome completely takes over. And you're like, I'm not supposed to be here. And that's when I just burst out crying one day at lunch and this wonderful woman named Marcy Siders came up to me and I said, I am not supposed to be here and I should go home. I have no right to be here. I don't know what I'm doing. And you just pulled me into this big hug and said, this is normal. And this is what you need to do. And this is what everybody goes through. And you just have to put the work into it. And so I went home and I said to my husband, I want to write this book. And he's like, now is not the time. Like, look at our life. Like, write as much as you want, but you know how much work it takes to get published. And that's what I learned at the conferences. It's no longer just submit it to somebody and it just goes into this ethos of never to be heard from again. You have to make connections. You have to meet the agents. You have to meet the editors and say, do you think I have something? And then what do I need to do to get published? And then you have to listen to them. So when I knew how much work there was, I was just like, okay, it's not the right time for me to publish, but I'm going to keep writing. And so I joined a writers group and they were very helpful and so kind. And they're like, do you know what POV is? And I was just, POV. Let's see. No. And I remember at Mount Hermon when I handed over my manuscript to an editor that I really liked, I was quiet and let her read it. And she just took 2 minutes and then closed the manuscript and then said, so you like to POV jump? And I was like, I do. And she's like, and then I was like, I do. Like, I realized that was the wrong answer. You're not supposed to be excited. And then she's like, you've got a lot to learn. So, and I did point of view. I kept jumping from character thought to thought. And so when I came back from that, I said, for 1 year, I'm just going to read craft books. I'm not going to read any fiction. I'm not going to read anything else besides craft books. I'm going to highlight everything that I need to learn. And then I'm going to take that and also type it out onto a document. And when I've reached the length of a book of 350 pages of notes, I'll stop. And so that's what I did. For 1 year,
Now,
I bought 25 top craft books. There's lots of lists out, and some of them give you instructions on technique. One technique I really wanted to master was the snowflake method, and it was disastrous for me. And I actually met the author, and I went up to him and I said, I've tried this and this. And I was telling him how I was trying to implement the snowflake method he had developed. He said, stop. Your brain does not work that way. It's not for you. Just stop. Oh, so there's craft books out there that some will jive with you and some will absolutely, you're like, I don't think I can do that. But I read and took 350 pages worth of notes and then said, now let me go back and work on the story again. And it was, story after story. And I thought, I just wanted to get published. That's everyone's goal. Like, Lord, if you have given me this story, surely it's meant to be published. I just couldn't believe how difficult it was. And then when I would sit down in front of an agent, I remember one looked at me and said, you're not ready. You're not ready, but this is what you need to do. And then would give me the steps of what I need to do. And then I did that. And then I was told you have to have a website. And then you have to have, do you have an author page on Facebook? Do you have this? And so I started doing everything they said while also working on the craft. But I was getting so discouraged and to the point where my husband said, you have to stop telling people you're a writer because it's not happening. I tell people, everyone who knows me knows that I write. And it wasn't that I just wrote stories. I would go to church and I would go up to the pastor and say, this brochure is awful. Would you like me to rewrite it? And I would rewrite the church bulletin. When kids were applying for college, I would have friends call me and say, can you look over my kids' application essays to these different colleges? anything that took form of writing, whether it was a church brochure or a college application, I'm like, give it to me and I'll write it. When my kids were in high school and I was felt like I was treading above water now, I went back to hospice and I thought maybe the story is just for me. Maybe the entire purpose was to help me get through my darkest and loneliest times as a mom, where I didn't have any friends because I had a child that was too difficult. I was blackballed from the play dates. And so it was just me and my characters. And I thought, if this is just a gift from God, so be it. And during that time, also, I went through a cancer journey of my own where I knew from the very beginning, I knew what I wanted to write because as my mom was going through cancer and I was sitting next to her, she was so sick. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how she's going to make it. I've never seen anyone this violently sick from chemotherapy. And the only thing that brought her joy was Jan Karen's Mitford series because it
Mm.
transported her to another world. And so I told her, I'm going to write you a book and it's going to be like Mitford, but it's going to take place in northern Minnesota and it's going to have kind of the feeling of Garrison Keeler's Lake Wobegon, because that's what I grew up with was Lake
Mhm.
Wobegon. And so that was the basis of my story. And when I tell other writers, I'm like, you have to know your roots, write what you know, but also what books just rooted so deeply inside of you that you're like, this is what I am attuned to. This is what I want to write. Lake Wobegon series. And it wasn't happening. But as I was working in hospice, I sit with my hospice patients, and sometimes they're there for months at a time. And because of the dying process, everybody thinks it's so quickly, and it often is not. And so I would sit to them and I would read them these stories that I wrote. And I remember a call coming one day from the daughter of the woman I had been sitting with. And she said, my mom keeps asking about this book. Can you tell me where I can get it? I said, oh, I'm sorry. It's just a story that I wrote. And she's like, she keeps asking for it. Would you mind coming and finishing it? And I knew she wasn't going to make it until the very end. So I would, tell her, skip parts and tell her what was going on. And I wanted to read her the end and I apologized for it. And she just kept saying, Holly, it's about the journey. It's okay. I just wanted to know the struggle that this character went through. And when I came home, I said to my husband, it's okay if it doesn't get published because I know it made a difference to this woman. And I had one person listen to it and she loved it. And so I was really settled in that. And I just began writing other stories because that's what you do. If you just have it on your heart and you listen to those characters, you just keep writing. I love connecting with other writers because they're such kindred spirits. They become my dearest friends. I love learning the craft of writing because you have to always be a student until your last breath. You should always be learning. And that's the attitude you need to take with writing is you always have to be learning about your craft and how to improve. And so I kept doing that. And I COVID hit and it was again a really hard time for everybody. And when the teachers were communicating with kids, and my son, he said, I need this one email. Do you have a separate email? I forgot. I had this email that some of my youngest child's teachers would just solely contact me through, and I hadn't checked it in years. And when I opened it, I saw that there was a letter from an acquisitions editor that was asking for Moonberry. And she said, and it was because I had submitted to the ACFW, American Christian Fiction Writers Genesis contest, where you get feedback on what's good or bad. And I made a semifinalist, but I didn't make the finalist route, and I never thought anything of it. But this one editor that had read it, she didn't have my name, but she started to Google all the names of the characters and the town and was trying to hunt me down. And somehow she got a hold of this email and sent it and said, is this you? Please respond to me. I don't care if you have an agent. I have to talk to you about Moonberry. I love this story and I want to see the entire book. And
Wow.
I looked at it and it was 2 years old. Um, 2 months before that, my husband, when we were really in the throes of COVID and everyone was in a bad place and the kids weren't doing well and I wasn't doing well. And I had also come out of my third major cancer surgery and I was doing horribly. And he said to me, that's it. Promise me you will not pursue publishing because I can't stand the sadness in your life anymore, of wanting this thing that's not attainable. And he said, because cancer changed our whole family. And my husband's attitude is, we're only going to do what makes us happy. And so I said, I promise, I give up. And it will take someone pounding on the front door and offering me a contract for me to say yes. I give you my word, I quit. And then I open up this email and it's this acquisitions editor saying, please respond to me. I have to finish the story. I don't care if you have an agent. I just need to speak with you. And I turned to my son who was in the room and I said, I think I'm being punked by God. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I showed him this and I said, it's 2 years old. There is no way I am going to respond to this. I'm never even 2 minutes late to a meeting. There's no way I'm going to respond 2 years later. But at the time, I did have an agent and I contacted her and she said, I know this editor. And so she contacted her and the agent was like, oh my gosh, I have thought about her so often. She never responded. And I thought the first thing was somebody else got her. And she said, I want to have a Zoom meeting with her in 2 days. And so we did. And in a matter of a couple weeks, I had a contract for On Moonberry Lake. How God's timing works. It came on the day my youngest son, with the one that had all the problems, graduated high school. I tell people when God's timing is not your timing, but it's always perfect.
Mhm.
And it was so frustrating. And I thought I wanted to publish before to take me out of the reality I was in because at times it was so hard and I didn't want to go through with it. I just wanted a huge distraction. But the blessing of God is that he gave me the story one after another. And in my darkest hours, they were always there. And what always comes to me is an elderly character. And they start to say, now, Holly, okay. And then they introduce themselves and we have this whole conversation. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I believe so much. The Holy Spirit's like, God chooses a perfect way to reach all of us. And based on how I grew up, he's like, okay, the way I'm going to get to my child, Holly, is obviously through story. So this is how I'm going to talk to her. But it was a wild ride. And then On Moonberry Lake came out and it was a 2-book contract. And I said, well, I have the second because I wanted to be just like Jan Karen's, where it's like Father Tim and Cynthia meet and then they get engaged and then they get married. And so I did the same thing with Moonberry. And they're like, no, no, we do not want the same protagonist. And I said, well, I can't sign this contract. They have to go in order. I mean, I can't rewrite the entire book. And my friend was like, give them one of your other books. And they didn't realize I, by this time, had 6 books written. And I was like, okay, all right, you know what? Okay, let's just do this. And so On the Blooming of Delphinium was the second that I signed for. And I said, well, it takes place in Moonberry, but it doesn't have the same characters. They're like, great. Well, after On Moonberry Lake came out, people definitely expressed their favorites. And then the Asian called and said, well, we need some of the people from Moonberry. And so then I did a little rewrite and inserting. So now it's like this, I just have so many characters in every book. It's hard to give them all space enough for the personalities to come out. But, and when people come up to me and say, oh, I loved your second book so much better than your first. I'm always like, first of all, that stings a little because I was like, my first one got me through motherhood. It got me through cancer. How can you say that? But I understand because it's world building. The first one, there's so many characters and I have to give so much space to the town itself. Whereas Delphinium just takes place in the flower shop, and you have these seniors that just take over her life and the shop. And it's a different feeling, but the one constant in all of my books is that I will always highlight the best of our population, and that's what I believe our senior population. I want to highlight seniors in the best way possible, where you see them for the beauty and the humor and the wisdom that they have to offer. And I did not want them to be this curmudgeon that sits in the corner and doesn't approve of a spouse or a boyfriend or tisks their tongue. I wanted to show seniors that were active and that we still need to incorporate them even in the smallest tasks in our life. And none of us are really acknowledging that or respecting that they have something to offer, and not just to be put off to the side and never seen again and just appear on holidays. But I wanted to show how we can incorporate them into our daily life. And that is the basis of every single one of my books. And I think that's what makes them very different. We can show the vitality and the creativity that these people bring to our lives. And
Mhm.
so it's when I look at my entire journey between cultural anthropology, my hospice care, my cancer journey, everything, it's just made my writing better and deeper and just have so much more fruit to it. It's given me empathy and opened me up to this other population of people where you just don't talk about it. But with the older community, how they respond has always, I mean, I walk into a room with someone in hospice and we're immediately kindred spirits. I immediately become a part of their family. And it's just been, it continues to be the most profound impact on my life. And I just write I write the books to release the characters in my head. That's what I've always said. I need to release them. My husband, so often, he'll knock on the door and say, "Are you on the phone or are you talking to a character?" Because I talk out loud to them as if they're real characters. And in the books, they offer their wisdom, but especially in Delphinium, I wanted to show, well, there's Henry, who used to be, a CFO for a major company and says, "Honey, this is how you do taxes."
Um, what book is going to be your next one?
Well, it's interesting because um, I wanted it to go Moonberry People because I'm not done with Cora and Ben. I
Oh
wanted
no.
Cora and Ben and then Delphinium. And then I wanted go back to Cora and Ben and find out another secret from one of the tea ladies. And for me, uh, writing requires a lot of flexibility. And whenever you say, I can't, you have to stop and pause and say, why did that come out of my mouth?
Mhm.
And you can feel very stuck. And that is not, there's no room for that in this business. So when someone who has been around for a lot of years, an editor or an agent, someone or a very successful author, and comes and challenges you with something, and if you say, I can't, you have to stop and you have to pause and say, let me get back to you. I'm going to work on that. I can't write that. If you're a writer, you can. My struggle is always that it's not just a single character. Literally a community of people always comes and talks to me all at the same time. And then that is how the stories come to me. They come in the quiet times and in this very busy culture when people I don't believe there's anything there's no such thing as writer's block. There really isn't. It is a matter of calming your brain enough for the creativity to come through in this very social media driven culture where we're on our phone and there's always the TV going on or something. And so my best thing is you have to do an activity that is boring enough but calms your thoughts down so that the creativity can come through. My favorite two things are ironing and vacuuming. If I'm stuck, I vacuum. And the great thing is, no one is ever in your family going to come up and say, let me do that for you. I iron everything because I get the best ideas because my hands are active. If I feel stuck, I have to say, how many hours have I been on the phone today? Just scrolling, because that will always block creativity. So put the phone down and start doing these tasks where I don't care if you use, scrub the kitchen floor in silence, something will come to you.
So would you say is one of the top three advices that you would give to writers who are, it is not a show up, get published, get a fruit basket, and then start on your next project? Okay.
What I would say is number one, I can't be a part of your vocabulary. That is number one. And you have to be open to change. You have to be open to other people's instructions on this is what you need to do, and then you need to do it. And
Which is humble.
which is absolutely. And the second would be you're always open to learning. And you're like, okay, what is the next step then? So you have to be well read. I'm stunned at how many writers I come across and they say I don't read. And my jaw just drops. I'm like, the only way you become a better writer is by reading other people and knowing what you like. I know would be sacrilegious to some people, but I highlight. I highlight some of their dialogue. I highlight their endings. And so I learn from other writers. And the third would be that creativity always fosters more creativity. So if you are feeling stuck, if you are spiraling and you're like, nothing is coming to me, the first thing I always ask someone is, what other creative things are you doing in your life? So take up that painting, no matter how bad you are at it, paint or sit there and crochet and knit. Do something creative and more creativity will come to you. But when the writing stops is when you're feeling starved inside, where you are starving your own soul of expressing yourself. Because I think God created us to be creative people.